feeding more volume is not going to be better for the calf as long as you're still feeding enough IgG, fat, and protein.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Dairy Science Digest. This is a podcast designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to the ears of dairy producers. I'm Reagan Bluell from the University of Missouri Dairy Team, and today's guest is Dr. Alberto Lopez, formerly of the University of Guelph, where he pursued his PhD in calf nutrition. And for the past nearly 3 years, he's been serving the industry as dairy nutritionist at Diamond Nutrition. Now, that dreaded scenario when a cow comes into the barn after calving, she's got no colostrum, and you realize the freezer of your donor colostrum is empty. Or maybe your farm is working on eradicating some contagious disease and you find yourself needing to utilize colostrum replacer. Regardless of the situation, we can find ourselves needing colostrum replacer on the dairy. The directions are clearly printed on the back of that package, but do we really understand the why? And so today we're going to not only talk about the why, but all of the interworkings associated with this very unique product that is so important to be delivered accurately. So acknowledging the value of that colostrum and the success of this very valuable critter right now, Alberto is here to talk to us about some of the research that they conducted to ensure successful passive transfer. The featured article this month is titled, "The Effect of Dilution on Colostrum Replacer on IgG Absorption, Abomasal Emptying Rate, and Gastrointestinal Permeability in Holstein Calves." So, welcome to the Dairy Science Digest. Thank you so much for joining us today. Would you please take a brief moment to introduce yourself to our listening audience?
Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I really feel honored. And as you mentioned, I finished my PhD at University of Guelph with Dr. Mike Steele. That was in June 2023. Before that, I did my master's at Penn State with Dr. Judd Heinrichs, and my undergrad was done here in Honduras. And since October 2023, I've been working with Diamond Nutrition Services as a dairy nutritionist and just doing some work with dairy cows in southern Alberta.
Very good. And so now, kind of zooming into that newborn baby calf, let's kind of talk a little bit about the structure of the project. There were 48 newborn Holstein bull calves that were assigned to one of 4 treatments. Can you talk a little bit about what the treatments were?
Yeah. So the main idea was to have 4 different levels of total solids. The baseline was the total solids that the mixing instructions have for this colostrum replacer. So if you just follow the mixing orders of this replacer by mixing 949 grams of powder with 1.7 kgs of water, the total solids came back to 360. So after that, we decided to dilute it by going 360, 320, 280, and 240. So those are the 4 treatments, and just we kept the same amount of powder in all the treatments, but we just added more water to decrease the total solids. And the main goal was to have that dilution plus having the same IgG delivered to every single calf.
You bet. And so the IgG concentration of this particular colostrum replacer was 150 grams of IgG. And I mention that, guys, because there are other colostrum products out on the shelves. And so don't just look at price, look at the amount of IgGs being delivered in this package, because that's really important. And when you go through and look at the composition of each treatment, there's a clickable link at the bottom of the show notes that will pull up the paper, and there on the 4th page it talks about all the statistical differences of each dilution factor, because of course it is more concentrated when you have less water. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the weight of a gallon of water, well, converting it over to liters or even gallons, our control had the least amount at 2.64 liters, which is about almost half of a gallon, right? Because a gallon is 3.78 liters, and so that's 43% less than a normal gallon of colostrum. And I don't know about you guys, but when I opened up this paper, the first thing that came across my mind is less is more. When I'm tubing that calf, if I can get less volume in there and get the same response, admittingly, Alberto, that's the reason I called you today, because I'm trying to make the lives of these dairymen easier, right?
Yeah.
Yet still successful. So I see here that the colostrum replacer that you use was from a single source. Can you talk a little bit about the different colostrum replacers out on the marketplace?
Yeah, this one is a standard 150 gram IgG colostrum replacer, but different batches where you can get more concentrated products. And then you have other colostrum replacer products available in the market that have different manufacturing procedures where you can see that protein and fat can really differ between them. So that's something that we should be very careful about as well.
Let's talk about osmolarity
Yeah.
milk. What is osmolarity and what's a normal maternal osmolarity? You were throwing around some 200 numbers there or 300. Talk me through what are we measuring?
Yes, just to keep it simple, osmolarity, we're just trying to measure total osmoles in colostrum. And as I mentioned somewhere in the paper, like more or less, we have seen that colostrum replacer, you find osmolarities of like around 300. But once you go to maternal colostrum, that can vary a lot and depending on the IgG concentration in bricks. So it's kind of hard to like, we were thinking about that at the beginning, like how to have different total solids, which it can be related to osmolarity, but you can find a lot of variation between maternal colostrum and as well between different colostrum replacers. As you know, some of them remove some fat and other ones they just dry it out. So it's kind of hard to control osmolarity given to a calf.
Yeah, because all of those different ingredients within the colostrum placer, they all impact the solution, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When I think of osmolarity, I do remember back all of the research in the early 80s that were talking about how important the concentration of the solution is in hindgut absorption. So all of this research is based on colostrum replacer. Do you have any thoughts on what it might look like if you were trying to enhance maternal colostrum that was slightly inadequate with colostrum enrichment?
These total solids, this dilution experiment was done with colostrum replacer. It can be a whole different world if we did almost the same experiment with maternal colostrum. Because we had this idea from a previous experiment. We published another paper that was about colostrum enrichment. Basically, we're trying to go from 30 grams per liter of IgG to 60. And the other treatment was trying to go from 60 grams per liter to 90 grams per liter. So when we did it 30 to 60 grams per liter of IgG just by adding powder to maternal colostrum, we saw a big jump in AEA in serum IgG concentration 24 hours.
Okay.
But when we did the 60 to 90 is when osmolarity went very high in total solids, and actually AEA decrease in IgG wasn't higher. So after that, we started thinking what can be causing that, and we saw that osmolarity and total solids are very high when you added powder to a 60 gram per liter colostrum, right? Which will be considered high quality. So after that, we started thinking maybe if we dilute something that is very concentrated, we can go back and have more absorption. So that was baseline for this experiment, right? But we did this with colostrum replacer. I think it will be very neat if we could do this with maternal colostrum. But I think we could see very different results if we do maternal colostrum instead of replacer.
Let's zoom out 30,000 foot. Let's talk a little bit about once you get the tube down the neck of the calf, and can you map out the path of colostrum if it's being tubed?
Yes, when we're tubing a calf, the main idea is to bypass, try to avoid the rumen, try to get that colostrum to the abomasal, and thereafter we have milk or colostrum get occurred, and eventually it gets delivered to the small intestine. And we have seen that different osmolarities could affect abomasal emptying rate, which is the time which it takes the colostrum to reach the small intestine. And it's good that you mentioned that because talking about osmolarity, because a previous study that we did with colostrum enrichment, just trying to piece things together here, one of the treatments osmolarity was above 800, and we were still feeding 4 liters of colostrum in that treatment, and it just took forever to feed that calf, even though we're tubing it. It took a couple minutes, and it was very, I don't want to say annoying, but it was very tricky for the guy feeding the calf. And
I
it was
think annoying's
also annoying.
right. Yeah, it's annoying. Let's call it what it is. It's frustrating.
It's frustrating for the person who is feeding it. It's also frustrating for the calf. Like you don't want to have the tube into the calf for a couple minutes.
Right.
Yeah. So around 800 is very high, highly hypertonic, and we saw that in our experiment. We didn't see that here because the maximum didn't reach that high, but yeah, it's
Yes. Well, and admittingly, I don't know a whole lot about the osmolarity of colostrum until I read your paper, and that's part of why I do this every month is just for me to continue to learn too. And I noticed that the data suggests that abomasal emptying starts to get negatively impacted around that 600 mark. And so we're throwing around all these numbers, and really osmolarity isn't something that I routinely think about. Is this something producers should be actually measuring, do you think?
To be honest, I think it's very important, but it's not very user friendly if you want to measure it on farm. If we were able to develop something that correlates probably bricks, I don't know, I don't think so, but I think it's something at least colostrum replacers should put in their label. And once we start telling farmers how osmolarity works, once they see a number that it's 800 or like 600, they kind of have an idea of how thick that mix is going to be, right?
And I feel like even just heightening awareness, like we're doing here today on the conversation, allows guys to recognize some of the symptoms of hypertonic solutions, and that way they can understand in the event that something's going haywire, they can call out their calf specialist or extension agent to maybe do some of these measurements that could be impacting, because acknowledging that depending on the softness of your water, your osmolarity could be impacted even by your water softener or other things like that. And so just being aware of it, even if it's not something that you routinely measure, might be a good idea. Now, speaking of tools on farm, when you're measuring passive immunity, because let's be real, that's all we're really here to talk about is successful transfer of passive immunity, or those IgGs. What are some targeted goals for guys, and how do they go about capturing or keeping track of that data?
Yeah, that's like a hit and miss. I have seen many farms that really keep track of their passive immunity. They were very close with their bat, and they have like averages and percentages of how many fall into the Lombard categories. And then we go to some farms that they don't even know how to measure STP, right? Or they don't even have a clue where their IgG should be. So I've seen both of them, and even just by teaching them to focus on that first colostrum feeding, we have seen big results. Like
Huge
sometimes,
differences.
yeah, and like it's kind of like funny how they react when they call you and they say, "Hey, all my calves are dying," or they have scours at day 7 and they're struggling. And so we just go and take blood samples and kind of explain them that what IgG does to the calf, and they see
Yes.
all like very poor and fair values. And once we start doing like a proper program, you can see those numbers go up, and you start seeing difference in the calf farm, which makes life easier for them.
Oh, so much easier.
Yeah.
And, whenever those calves are flourishing through day 7, day 10, day 14, all those marks when the bugs tend to get them, if they can flourish through that, they never skip a beat. They
Yep.
just go. I liken colostrum management a lot to transition cow management, because if you do those things right, there's just these critical management points. And if you get those right, everything is so much easier. And so that's why we're here today talking about colostrum management. And I think that there are many producers that maybe hit that window that you were talking about, that maybe didn't even understand the importance of IgGs, but not anymore. Now that these calves over the last year or so have been valued where they're at, we've all learned real fast how to ensure that they stay alive, because that calf is very valuable. And additionally, what I've seen here locally is as calf buyers are coming through, especially for those crossbred animals, there's quite a few calf buyers that are actually determining their pay price on successful passive transfer. So
Yeah.
they'll pay you an amount when they pick up the calf, and then they will keep data on that producer on how successful they are at their colostrum management and therefore mortality rates, and that producer is going to get paid on a sliding scale based on whether they're doing it or not.
Yeah, that it's good that you mentioned that. I have seen that, and I have seen also something similar. I have seen where like calf sellers guarantee you that they fed at least 2 pouches of colostrum replacer.
Uh-huh.
Like most of them have 150, so they're like telling you, okay, we fed this calf at least 300 grams of IgG, so that's why we have this price for this calf.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that way you can be more certain that that animal is going to be successful. Anywho, yeah, I think a gold standard that kind of floats around in the textbooks is you want about 40% of your calves to be greater than 25 grams per liter
Yeah.
And that, how do you measure that on farm to make sure you're doing it right?
I think that 40% goal should be like a proper program over a couple of weeks, at
Mm-hmm.
least. And then just make sure that at least 40% of your calves fall under that category, not just like in 1 week or like 1 month, right?
Mm-hmm. Of course, IgGs is what we've been talking about all this time, and that's really the topic of interest that was being measured. So tell me a little bit about how the dilution effect impacted IgG concentration in these animals, because you did serial blood sampling several hours concurrently for that first day of life, and then followed them through 7 days of life. So talk to me about what your observations were.
Just to be clear, we didn't see any major differences if you talk about IgG, AEA, or IgG at day 7. No difference at all. We saw something with IgG area under the curve at 24 hours and day 7, which like from AUC 24 hours, it was greater for dilution 2 and dilution 3 in comparison to dilution 1. And the AUC at day 7 was greater in dilution 3 in comparison to control. That could be telling us something, but still, as we were talking about, volume was something that we didn't control, and we acknowledge that. So we believe there's something going on, but we weren't able to prove it with this project. And what I'm also thinking, talking about IgG, I'm pretty sure you have heard before that there's like an upper limit of how much IgG a calf can absorb in a certain time period or feeding. People say above 350, above 400 grams of IgG is when you start noticing drops in AEA and IgG absorption. And if I go to start thinking about this project, we only fed 150 grams of IgG, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not nearly close to that supposed upper limit. So
Sure.
I think that could be one of the reasons why we didn't see like a major benefit by diluting these treatments, right? Because we're just feeding 150 grams of IgG. I think there might be a possibility to see like a major effect if we try to dilute, let's say, for example, a control that has like 450 grams of IgG and then dilute it by half or something like that. I think that the volume and the IgG fed were things that affected why we didn't see any serum IgG differences in these calves.
I see. I would guess that about 90% of all the researchers that I talk to actually say there needs to be more research, and so I think that next question could be, can you increase the concentrations of IgG and deliver it in a larger volume, and maybe take care of that with one feeding right there, bing bang boom, done.
Yeah.
Get it delivered. Now, you were talking about area under the curve and this and that, and so let's talk a little bit about abomasal emptying, because that was one of the things that you measured. And I guarantee that most of the listeners here, when they're tubing that calf, they're not thinking about abomasal emptying. So talk to me about how that milk gets from the abomasum to the site of absorption and why that matters.
So abomasal emptying is just the time colostrum takes to reach the small intestine, which is the site of absorption. And it all varies. It depends on the composition of your colostrum and mainly the curd that gets formed in that abomasum. And then you get that slow release of the whey, and then eventually everything gets intestine. And that largely depends, as I mentioned, composition of colostrum. Plus, I think a big variable here is volume. So those two main factors can affect how fast that colostrum can reach to the site of absorption, which is very important for these calves in the first 24 hours of life.
Absolutely. And I guess if we could rewind back a little bit and go back to the concentration of serum IgG over time. And I want to draw all the readers' eyes to page 8. There's some colorful graphs there if you're printing it out. Make sure you print it in color, because you can quickly see how tangled up these lines are. They are not statistically different.
Mm-mm.
And I think the reason, selfishly, the reason why I called you today, Alberto, was to try to explain to producers it's okay. A smaller volume is okay. And this is less than a gallon of water. And make sure you're using the right temperature so it actually gets into solution. But what I'm learning from your paper in this graph, is it appropriate for me to take home that I can mix that with a little less water and be confident that she's still absorbing it?
Oh. Well, yeah, it's kind of good to let people know feeding more volume is not going to be better for the calf as long as you're still feeding enough IgG, fat, and protein. But for this scenario, you can feed a little bit less water and still be able to achieve those at least decent phosphate transfer levels. But I think we need to be careful about how thick osmolarity plays a role, right? Because for this specific product, for example, you can see the osmolarity was around 800, 835. So I'll be curious to see, just let's say you feed 0.5 less liters and still mixing the same amount of powder, how high will the osmolarity come back? That will be also very interesting to see how does that affect how everything gets absorbed in calf.
Yeah, I did find it very interesting that dilution 1 treatment was one of them that had a statistically different absorption rate.
Yeah, you can see that AEA drops for dilution 1, and like numerically, you can see that it drops for dilution 1 and then goes up again for dilution 2 and dilution 3. Yeah, you can see that in the AEA graph that is in page number 9.
And so it is curious. Yes. Well, I think my absolute favorite question to ask all the scientists that I'm recording is, what would you like boots on the ground dairymen to learn from this informative project? What do you think are the important take-homes for colostrum replacer feeding?
I think the main goal here is to try to tell people that volume is very important, and also how you mix colostrum replacer is very important. And the main goal, as you also were mentioning, like you don't have to be feeding 5 liters, 4.5 liters to a calf when he's a newborn, just because people think, oh, I just fed 4 liters and that's enough. Like you should be focusing on other stuff, right? And that's a good point that you mentioned, that if you can feed just 2.9 total volume fed, and you can still get what a calf needs to get delivered, right? I think the main idea here is to like focus on the quality instead of just thinking about volume. And I think a good step for the future is going to be to try to teach people about total solids and osmolarity. I know like for some oral rehydration product they tell you, but at least I haven't seen that in colostrum replacer. But I think it's something that should be considered in the future.
Very good. Well, Alberto, this has been a great discussion, and I thank you so much for your time and willingness to share your team's observations on the dilution effect of colostrum replacer. These replacement heifers and heck, the bull calves are now so valuable that colostrum is now and always should be a non-negotiable for newborn calf care. The more we understand and can optimize the absorption, the stronger your calf will be. So listeners, I applaud you for taking time out of your day today to listen in and gather sound science to base your management decisions around. I've really enjoyed this discussion and have learned a lot from the conversation. It's been the July edition of the Dairy Science Digest, a monthly podcast project designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to your ears. We highlight peer-reviewed research articles in press and is provided to you by the University of Missouri Dairy Team. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get future editions straight to your cell phone. This is Reagan Blue with the Dairy Science Digest, and I hope you have a great